Seize it. Strip the core and send the log strings to Junction Trine. I want a breach audit within the hour." The words fell like iron weights in the tribunal chamber, spoken without pause or tone by Varnon Korth, Dominion strategist supreme. His upper spine remained rigid, even as lesser officials shifted uncomfortably behind their filtered visors. Beneath the tribunal's vaulted structure, with its polished obsidian inlays and gas-fed light lines, the display chamber hovered with a map the size of a command deck. Vale Myth 77, flickered red. The probe in question, a dull graphite-colored relic barely 3 meters wide, floated idly near the outer belt of Telvac's third arc, its casing labeled in multilingual code blocks: Terran Calibration Unit, Gravimetric Drift Survey, Code Theta 9 Compliance, UN registered but lawful under Section 7, A/52 neutral entry. To the Dominion, it was a petty insult. Another backwater species trying to bait relevance by dropping old hardware in sovereign space. But the wording, so clean, so annoyingly aligned with Concord bylaws, left no viable response other than detainment. Korth leaned closer to his terminal, which projected a pale yellow tactical heads-up readout. No shielding, no active signals, no reactive pulses. "It's a brick, an old one," added Grevik tone, comms analyst rubbing a calloused knuckle against his mandible as he squinted at the reams of legal subtext. "That registry format hasn't been used in over 100 years, same as their surface miners. Still flagged open source," Korth muttered, his breath condensing faintly in the chamber's chilled micro-environment. "They're playing dead, and they know we have to comply." Tone's fingers danced across the tactile interface, rerouting orbital feeds from the regional dock. Enforcer drone cluster approaching now. No movement from the object. Far above them, unseen but monitored, a silent armada of inspection drones formed a half-loop and began their approach. No alarms, no emissions. The Terran pod simply floated, non-reactive, as though it had died long before arrival. "Command has authorized seizure," came a dry relay from overhead. The moment the drone clamps latched onto the pod's lower anchoring ports, a shift occurred. Not audible, not visible, but felt. Across Junction Trine's tidal array, Dominion scientist Mirok Val stood still, eyes glued to a ripple in the orbital displacement feed. He hadn't expected anything unusual, just routine drag data, planetary tide response charts, and crustal flex logs from Telvac 3's twin moons. But as his tracking line skittered left on its own, then corrected right faster than orbital mechanics allowed, his neck twitched. "No seismic events," he whispered. "No propulsion activity." Then why the oscillation? The chamber's illumination pulsed once, reflecting minor fluctuation, a common energy event during external remote latching. But the after ripple was wrong. Not a wave, a rebound. "Mirok," came the low voice of Suldan Ref, his mentor, seated 2 rows above. "That's not satellite interference. That's spatial rebound in a stabilized orbit." Mirok leaned closer. "There's no originating push. That's the problem," Suldan answered quietly. In orbital approach logs, the captured Terran probe remained still, encased in Dominion harnessing fields. Its panels refused to open. No AI handshake, no sensor ping, no transmission, just dead steel. But deep inside its core, something else was unfolding. A cluster of dormant nodes, black crystal etched with recursive alignment codes, activated the moment Dominion threading tools breached the probe's firewall. But they didn't emit, they recalibrated, they listened. The Shardwake lattice inside the Terran unit didn't attack, it didn't transmit, it simply shifted the reference anchor. In doing so, it forced Dominion orbital infrastructure to recalculate its own positioning constants, silently introducing a new baseline for how distance, time and gravity behaved relative to planetary cores. The effect wasn't immediate, it was slower, smarter. Back in the Dominion sub-council chamber, Korth glanced at a side feed. "Did that moon just move?" Tone blinked. "No sir, I mean yes, but the stellar charts still show." "Hold on." They both turned as a series of gravitational compliance warnings slid onto the feed like snow. "Orbital inversion detected. Delta shift exceeds local constant. Retrograde drift verified. No impulse source logged." The moon hadn't been pushed, it had recentered. Korth's second heart pulsed once, tighter than usual. "Where's the error originating?" "No error," said Tone. Voice hollow now. The systems are behaving as if the moon's new position is normal. They've already adopted it as true. Korth stared at the display. That's not possible. Neither was today, said Suldan, stepping into the room without preamble. His coat was half unfastened, breath cold as it left him. We've triggered something. The Terrans didn't deploy a weapon. They let us redefine it into place. Korth didn't speak for several seconds. His eyes followed the orbital path of the captured pod as it drifted into holding above Telvac 3. The calibration tag was still visible, glowing faintly under Dominion clamps. Tone, issue a holding freeze. No dissection, no data probes. It's too late. Some sub-technicians already opened the base shell. A pause, then we'll see what Earth let them find. Mirok Val's later report, buried in the encrypted archive beneath Dominion high science logs, included the following. I believe we have encountered not a probe, but a question. It did not resist us. It waited for us to believe it was dead. Once we gave it authority by touching it, it answered us with a different truth. And somewhere in low Telvac orbit, the pod remained stationary. But the stars behind it shifted, not across the sky, across meaning. What was once orientation had now become suggestion. Gravity had not changed. The way it was understood had. Earth, after all, never needed to fire. It merely invited you to do the math wrong, until your moons moved of their own accord. Cut the jump countdown. Something's wrong with the corridor map. Torvikil didn't shout. His voice had a curious stillness to it, as though he were staring at something that shouldn't be there, and yet couldn't look away. His hands hovered above the navigation sphere, the microfilament strands still pulsing blue against his gloves, unacknowledged. In front of him, the cruiser's curved cockpit glowed with misaligned data swarms. Threads that should have converged into a clean jump line swerved. Some bled light backward, others pulsed irregularly, like tired veins. The display blinked, calibration nominal. Departure corridor validated. It was lying. Iln, your corridor is clean. Your burning clock cycles, came the voice of Relin Stave from the remote command wing. Crisp, clipped, no patience for theatrics. You're to jump to Anchorage 9 and upload the scan trace from the captured probe. Authorization is locked. Torvik exhaled slowly through his teeth, eyes tracking the alignment grid, shifting like mist caught in low gravity. No stars in the back half of the corridor, he murmured. Relin's reply took longer this time. Repeat that. No stars. There's shape, there's color, but it's hollow, like someone painted space and forgot to add the sky behind it. The silence that followed cracked under its own tension. Inside the cockpit, a low vibration, not audible, but sensed across the joints, passed through the control rails. The kind of ripple that didn't trigger alarms because the ship wasn't technically moving, but he felt it in his molars. Ship log 4.39, 0 jump vector plotted, verified, subframe stabilizers engaged, countdown initialized, anchor point drift, minus 0.003 AU, correction accepted, correction accepted, correction accepted, correction accepted, correction. It froze. Torvik blinked. His interface still pulsed, but the correction line looped, repeating like a chant. His right hand reached for the manual override. No resistance, but no compliance either. The override handle felt heavier, denser, or he felt lighter. Iln to command. Loop confirmed. System believes correction drift is infinite. It's validating infinity. That sentence had no protocol reference. Relin's voice cut in again, thinner now. Reverting jump. Hold position. Ping us from beacon B7. Torvik triggered the emergency beacon manually. The button clicked. Lights danced. The HUD displayed transmission confirmation. No return ping. The beacon didn't fail. It vanished. Status now, barked Grevik tone from Dominion High Relay. Where's his signal? Where is that cruiser? He jumped early. Someone replied behind him, but logs show static velocity. No jump distortion, no warp decay. Just gone. Gone as in dispersed. No, gone as in never occupied. Grevik stepped toward the main relay node, where Torvik's jump corridor was visualized on a three-dimensional anchor grid. But the grid didn't track the ship's departure. It had erased the corridor itself. I want a vector replay, full raw feed. Strip auto corrections. They did. The playback didn't show a ship vanishing. It showed the corridor tightening, closing like an eye, folding into its midpoint, and pulling its edges inward, until only blank topology remained. Not even noise, just stillness. Torvik Iln sat motionless in the cockpit, or rather he believed he did. The stars were still absent. The light from the internal HUD had taken on a washed yellow cast, like something pretending to be alive. The walls of the cruiser didn't hum or creak. They held him like a coffin designed not to bury but to confuse. He activated the fallback light. It didn't turn on. Instead, the cockpit flashed a message: "You are in a verified location. Coordinate interpretation unavailable." Torvik swallowed. "Ilm, to anyone listening, I am in loop. Nothing around me confirms existence. I still hear internal ventilation, but the rest, it's a reflection that forgot what it was reflecting." Outside the ship, if outside could even be trusted, nothing approached, fired, or emerged. The cruiser hadn't been pulled away. It hadn't exploded. No enemy had interfered. Earth didn't strike. It simply adjusted what the Dominion believed movement was. In Junction Trine's lower analytics chamber, Mirok Val stared at the recursive beacon log. Beacon B7 hadn't gone dark. It was returning signal to itself. The transmission looped through 12 comm relays, all validating internal confirmations with no source. Telemetry confirms echo patterns from a signal that no longer exists, Val muttered. Suldan Ref leaned against the steel-framed observation, while watching the simulation screen fold back on itself. "It's a hall of mirrors," he said. "Only the mirrors are made of interpretation." Val looked up. "We gave the probe our physics." Ref didn't nod, didn't blink, and it used them to rewrite what there means. Torvik's final internal log, saved inside the cruiser's failed navigation module, recorded a sequence that no one else would hear, because no one else could interpret it. "I am not in space. I am in memory. A hallway made of assumptions, and every time I walk forward, the hallway recalculates what walking means. If someone is listening, don't search for me. You'll find yourself instead. And if Earth is behind this, they didn't kill me. They left me somewhere your equations can't point to." Dominion Command, for all its resources, sent no recovery crew, not out of cowardice, but because they couldn't triangulate where to begin. They had positional coordinates. They had time of departure logs. They had ship weight, jump schedule, and beacon protocols. And yet, when mapped across sector logs, it aligned with no navigable location, not lost, just dereferenced, like a name struck from memory by removing the language that created it. By dawn cycle, the remaining fleet near Vale 77 had reoriented its command structure, pulling all assets away from the probe site. Korth issued no commentary, no press broadcast, just a singular order archived for posterity: disregard loss, disregard trajectory, vector invalid. That night, Mirok Val stared into the archive logs. He wrote nothing. He just kept reading Torvik's final line. It simply stopped making sense. The phrase wasn't an error. It was a warning. "That's not an error. That's a correction loop, failing to align with its own baseline." Mirok Val placed the waveform analysis slate onto the curved data bay in front of Suldan Ref, the edges of the display flickering under his touch. The interface showed a series of decaying gravitational curls layered over solar flare activity from Telvac 3. Each curl peeled back from the last like frost fracturing a pane, symmetrical at first, but increasingly skewed in impossible ratios. Ref didn't blink. Instrument decay can mimic phase lag if solar tilt affects calibration. Not when the Planck threshold shifts in the data itself. Mirok snapped, his voice barely rising but honed like a scalpel, and certainly not 12 micro-time scales in sequence. The observation deck swayed slightly with artificial gravitational stabilization, but the change was deliberate. Junction Trine had rerouted power from orbit to deal with flux inconsistencies in high-altitude tide readers. Neither man commented. The station's artificial horizon had become too unreliable to trust without visual confirmation, and the windows had been sealed since the cruiser disappeared. Ref lifted the slab of data, staring at the waveforms collapsing inward with each consecutive pass. The decay was not natural. It didn't echo outward. It folded inward, spiraling toward a hidden constant. A deeper logic. "You think the Terran probe did this?" Ref asked, voice low but no longer dismissive. "I think it allowed this," Mirok said, pulling up a set of recalibrated scan logs overlaid in false color. and I think we've been reading the wrong rule set since the moment we touched it. The slab responded to his gesture, morphing into a solar annotation grid. Flares were mapped in color-coded gradients, but the flare arcs didn't follow standard plasma behaviors. They curled like fishhooks, dragging spectral weight in from nothing. Each burst began stronger than its predecessor, an inversion of how stars were supposed to burn. Ref traced one arc with his finger, eyes narrowing. This isn't ejection, this is retrieval. Exactly. The flares are collapsing inward, Mirok said, voice strained now, as though admitting it made the air heavier. They're not shedding energy, they're taking it back. Outside, Telvac 3's primary continued to pulse with steady light, unconcerned with the absurdity it exhaled. I ran a correlation test, Mirok added. Cross-checked temporal lag against orbital density and radiation slope. They all failed. Failed as in, they returned non-computable variances. They weren't misaligned, they're incompatible. Soldan Ref turned the display upside down. The waveforms didn't invert. They corrected. Both men went silent. Elsewhere in the station's analytic wing, the senior computational arrays flickered between two sets of constants, one established by centuries of astrophysics, and the other, a foreign logic structure bleeding in through telemetry. Val had named it the drift set. It wasn't Terran. It wasn't Dominion. It was something newer, deeper, as though Earth had cracked open the cosmic manual and rewritten Chapter 0. He gestured to bring up the drift overlay, hands trembling slightly from unspoken exhaustion. Look here. Where they split, it's not random, it's directional. Aligned along a non-inertial curve that shouldn't exist. Ref frowned. What do you mean? Mirok's voice dropped. I mean we're seeing gravity behave as if it's remembering something we never taught it. The silence in the chamber thickened like pressure before a storm. Ref broke it. What's the worst interpretation? That this isn't sabotage, Val said, that it's a redefinition protocol. Passive, legal, recursive. Ref crossed his arms, absorbing the implication. Then why no broadcast? Why the silence? Because they don't need us to understand it. Just to fail in its presence. He tapped the slab again. And we are. Could the stars shift position without movement? Val asked softly, as if posing a riddle to the ceiling. Ref didn't reply, so Val continued. Could distance change if you redefined the constant that defines it? Not distort it, not hide it, just rewrite the lens. The display flared briefly as a new data sequence uploaded from a relay ship that hadn't yet been corrupted by spatial drift. The files arrived blank, not damaged, validated complete, but devoid of signal content, as though the instruments had recorded a perfect absence. We're not watching stars, Val whispered. We're watching our assumptions evaporate. Ref turned, his face unreadable under the station's shifting lights. This isn't war, this is revision. And somewhere between those words and the next breath, the observatory's inertial dampers fired without command. A soft pop, like a lung overinflating, echoed from the stabilization ring. One of the inner panels cracked and refroze. No one had touched it, nothing had impacted it. The station's alignment protocols, based on orbital tethers, had just resynced to a reference point that hadn't been programmed. Mirok's voice was nearly a whisper now. They're not destroying our reality. They're just making us live in theirs. Behind them, one of the waveform feeds failed again, but this time it didn't crash. It turned inside out. The graph began redrawing itself backward, using anchor points that hadn't existed in earlier versions of the data. Time, it seemed, was following a different path. One Earth had quietly handed them the moment the probe was seized. Ref stepped toward the slab, gaze hardening. We can't contain this. We already failed to, Val replied. There were no explosions, no fleets, no demands, just an equation running deeper than language, burning quietly behind every sensor, rewriting what it meant to see, to measure, to prove. Earth had said nothing, yet somehow, that was louder than any threat, and in that silence, the laws of nature began to forget themselves. Target locked. 3 torpedoes queued. Confirm primary. Fire on breach vector 7. Varnenkorth's voice cut through the fleet's command bridge with such finality that none of the operators flinched. Inside the flagship Colvis strain, rows of Dominion tacticians adjusted their neural relays and locked sync to the firepath lattice. Around them, The chamber crackled with active data bleed as the heads-up displays stretched across walls of stratified crystal, feeding live coordinates in amber-white flicker. Cold air moved in tight spirals from the ceiling ducts, filtered and dry, biting like dry ice down their throats. Graviton null warheads released, announced Turl Drave, the strike helm, fingers locked to the guidance staves. Flight path programmed for low arc ingress, impact projected in 6 units. Korth didn't nod. He simply turned, eyes narrowed at the sector-wide model suspended above the floor. It shimmered in fragments, barely holding stable alignment, lines jittering with embedded predictive conflicts, like the space itself was unsure what version of the future to render. The Terran probe, still unmoving, still silent, floated within that chaos, legal labels still intact, still transmitting its passive compliance codes as if nothing had changed. Korth's jaw flexed. Their silence is the weapon. The torpedoes arced, 3 points of condensed energy sheathed in null-field casings. They moved without friction, shedding no wake. Instead of generating heat trails or radiation, they cut through space like razors dipped in ice, distorting the sensors in subtle ways that the systems couldn't quantify. Telemetry is slow, Drave said. Clarify. Range confirms missile vector. Visual confirms separation. But our readings lag by 5.7 milliseconds. Continuously, like something's pulling data backward, Korth stepped closer to the central feed. We're not chasing their weapon. We're chasing the law it obeys. The words came unfiltered. Not metaphor. Observation. Colvin Strike's forward viewports didn't show a flash when the warheads reached their target. No detonation. No scatter. Instead, compression. Like watching a sheet of fabric pulled tight between invisible hands, the sun's corona around Telvac 3's star collapsed inward, folding against itself in a curve no known formula accounted for. Light didn't explode, it curved. Color bled from yellow to black and stopped at a crescent that shimmered without radiating. Confirm energy dispersion, snapped Korth. Drave blinked. There's no release, energy readings drop, not redistributed, gone. Mass radeout, Korth demanded. Solar body mass, reduced. Internal gravitational pressure declining, core stability altered, but containment remains. Another pause. Korth watched as the curve on the heads-up display shifted again, forming a hard edge, space outlining absence rather than presence. Is it possible, Korth said slowly, that the star obeyed something else? Aboard the support vessel Verloc TN, fleet physicist Osric Vol stood frozen before his diagnostic cascade. The numbers weren't erratic, they were consistent, but consistently wrong in the exact same way, across every system. He watched radiation levels drop, not from the flare, but from baseline background emissions. It was as if the sun no longer believed it had to emit light. He activated an internal cross-check. The diagnostic tool returned a statement never seen before. Anchor point invalid. Constance recalibrated to observed compliance. His throat tightened. Observed compliance. The phrase rolled off his tongue like a joke delivered too late to laugh at. He whispered to the onboard AI, "What's the fallback interpretation?" The system didn't hesitate. Unknown, but fully coherent under new framework. That line shouldn't exist. He hadn't programmed that logic tree. He wasn't alone in writing this version of reality anymore. Korth walked the command dais as his team tried to recalibrate orbital defense for the remainder of the fleet. But calculations based on prior constants spun into recursive failure. Distances looped, acceleration vectors, broke alignment, gravitational anchoring, gave false positives. Restart map layering, Korth said flatly. Use deadweight calibration, no predictive math. That'll drop navigation to pre-expansion levels, replied a tactician. Then walk, he said. At least walking doesn't lie. The man complied, face drained. Behind them, the simulation screen flared red. Not a warning, not a breach, a reset. Every Dominion vessel's hull mass had dropped by 1%. Every sensor agreed, not unevenly, not due to fuel loss or heat shift, an even reduction, every atom obeying a new command. On Colvin Strain, Rellan Stave appeared on the bridge via hardline link. His expression bore a tight focus laced with rare hesitation. "You need to hear this," he said. "Speak," Korth replied. "We reran Vol's data through an off-grid interpreter. external constants removed, only internal fluctuations remained. It produced one result. He uploaded the code. The central display pulsed, and then flashed a rotating glyph, 3 interlocking curves that never touched, yet circled a vanishing point. It's a Terran equation. Korth said nothing. Relin added, it's not applied, it's embedded. The star obeyed it before we fired. You're telling me Earth installed laws before we noticed? I'm saying they didn't install anything, they just allowed the system to prefer their version. Korth looked at the frozen displays. The warheads had done nothing. They'd simply pointed at a place where nature now answered to different logic. The Terran probe, still motionless, had never responded, but the fabric around it had. Disengage the fleet, Korth ordered. Someone objected. We haven't fired our main batteries. We already did, Korth replied. We fired physics. Earth wrote the recoil, and across the solar surface, the corona curved tighter, folding in, not into itself, into nothing. The laws that once governed this sector had gone dark, and they were not coming back. Star map is black. The words fell like fractured ice against the comms rail. Keln Tavir, the lead navigation architect aboard Voron Reach, stared at the plasma-lit grid bleeding static over a canvas of empty coordinates. Telvac 3's sun remained visible, an anchor no longer tied to anything, but everything beyond it had vanished, not obscured. Erased. On his panel, astrometric anchors flickered out one by one. Systems blinked gray, then dissolved from the registry. Each disappearance returned no error, no lost signal, just blank acknowledgement, as if they had never been charted to begin with. There's no frame to lock to, Tavir murmured. We've got orientation with no scaffold. The bridge didn't respond. No one knew how. Inside Kulvet Strain's ops tier, Varnan Korth watched as the sector's command lattice collapsed in real time. Heads-up projections crumbled from organized geometry into jittering outlines. Fleet overlays, previously tethered by parallax-fed beacons, lost cohesion. The room grew colder, not from temperature, but from the quiet knowledge that maps no longer held meaning. How many ships are still locatable? Korth asked. 27, said Drave, who hadn't looked up since the drift began. But only 8 confirmed the same spatial reference twice. Korth narrowed his gaze. Repeat that. 8 vessels return consistent telemetry. The rest update with geometric anomalies, circular movement with no propulsion. One shows mirrored location strings. You're saying they've curled in place. Drave hesitated. I'm saying they're repeating position while moving. On the outer rim of Fleet Node 7, the cruiser Selvek Hold began rotating, not on its axis, but around a point in space no one else could detect. Internally the crew felt no shift. Grav balance held. Systems remained green, yet external visuals showed the ship trailing a ribbon of afterimages. Spatial stutters caught mid-frame like a film reel chewing itself apart. Commander Revik Lorne, watching from the command pit, activated local broadcast. Hold fleet, reorient to grid alpha, confirm stabilizers and thruster pulses, do not execute drift correction. No reply, not silence, just open comms returning nothing. Speech transmitted, but not acknowledged. The relay bounced back with the original waveform unchanged, like talking to your own shadow in a corridor that grew longer each second. Across the Dominion's relay arc, communications collapsed, not jammed, but uncoupled from sequencing. Transmissions arrived before they were sent. Others looped endlessly, time-stamped in future increments. The fleet's clocks didn't recognize. In Relic Node 2, an AI interpreter began filtering messages from ghosted signatures, messages signed by ships already lost, reports written by crews no longer assigned. One transmission simply read, "We navigated perfectly. The map is wrong." Another, "My reflection moves before I do. I think we've gone behind the idea of place." Mirog Vol stood within Junction Trine's lower harmonic deck, ankle-deep in data flares and cooling pipes. Around him, analysts attempted to stabilize the sector registry archive. Every 10 seconds, the station's core recalculated its own position, producing a slightly different result each time. "I need a static reference," Vol said. "Just one, even a false one." "You won't get it," Ref replied from the side channel. "We can't rely on fixed coordinates when the constants beneath them are mutating." "Then we anchor to decay," Vol said. "Find the pattern in the failure." One of the relay slabs to his left convulsed, visual data stammering between wideband pulses and line-loss gray. The shape of a familiar orbital chain appeared, then fractured into triangular noise. He marked the timestamp. That segment had returned too soon. It was a second early by all internal clocks, which meant time, just like space, was no longer a neutral platform. On Colvet Strain, Korth watched the collapse unfold without speaking. His flagship remained motionless by design, its navigational thrusters hard-locked to resist any software drift. He turned to Drave. "What is Earth doing?" Drave didn't answer immediately. He tapped his fingers once, recalibrated the display into fixed mode, and zoomed into the origin node, the point where the Terran probe still floated. "It's not outputting." "Then what?" "It's anchoring." Korth leaned forward. "Explain." Drave activated a cascade overlay, feeding data from the last hour into motion-based visualization. The resulting image showed not ships moving through space, but space adjusting around ships. Each vessel floated on a grid that flexed, curled, or reversed, depending on proximity to the probe. "They're not guiding force," Drave said. "They're modifying the grid behind it." Korth processed that for several seconds. "So there is no battle?" Drave nodded once. "Only the illusion of stability being redefined behind us." By late cycle, 39 ships were lost. Not to fire, not to explosion, to disappearance. 2 looped back into themselves, observed from exterior drones as endlessly folding frames, their own tails now ahead of their bows. 1 vessel reported seeing itself approach, wave, and vanish, before self-identity degraded into static. The log ended mid-phrase. "We are navigating backward, I think." It never resolved. Sector Control issued a command quarantine. All ships were to freeze movement, not out of fear, but because motion now risked reinterpreting the idea of existence. To move forward might mean stepping outside what could be defined. And once left, not even memory guaranteed return. Korth stood before the fleet display, now permanently dimmed. He issued no further orders. His final directive was added manually, inputted through a local port to avoid drift corruption. "We have lost reference." He didn't write more. He didn't need to. Earth hadn't fired a shot. They'd simply adjusted the framework. And the Dominion, still bristling with weapons, no longer knew where it was, or what that meant. "Authorize the Lance. No proxies. Full ignition." Varnan Korth's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. When someone like him issued a command without volume, it meant desperation had become calculation. On Colvestrain's primary tier, everything froze except the countdown. Across the rear vault, 10 Dominion custodians rushed to awaken a weapon older than their system's charter, housed in an inertial cask behind triple radiation seals. The Etheric Lance wasn't classified as ordnance. It was a fail-safe. A constant correction system, built before the Dominion even knew Earth's name. Never tested, never trusted, only preserved. Korth stepped through the ignition gate, his footsteps echoing against the floor, bare with the chill of unanchored air. Drave stood waiting, pale under the emergency lights. "This violates Treaty Depth 10, Drave said, voice low. Korth didn't look at him. "So does disappearing mid-sentence." Drave swallowed his next objection and keyed the final input. The lance vibrated, not audibly, but beneath the skin like air losing shape. Its spire rose, angular and black-veined, coated with patterns that pulsed against known geometries. Logic withered in its presence. Korth stared at it for a second longer than protocol allowed. Fire into the fold. Outside the hull the lance discharged. It didn't emit light. It removed it. A ring of not darkness peeled outward, stripping photons from space like peeling lacquer. A moment later, gravity folded backward. Every ship within half a sector bucked. Not pulled, not pushed, remembered. Their hulls, engines, crews, yanked into a prior state. On board the Selvek hold, Commander Revek Lorne watched his bridge glitch. The ceiling snapped from steel blue to half-construction gray, then blinked into battle readiness from 3 hours prior. Consoles reverted, systems backdated, even crew uniforms, torn seconds ago, restored. But their injuries didn't. One man looked down and whispered, "My leg's broken, but my pants aren't." The lance's effect radiated like an echo in reverse. It didn't destroy. It peeled. Ships turned inward, frames collapsing into outlines they hadn't held in years. One destroyer compacted into its dry dock blueprint, crews screaming as rooms shrank, bulkheads reabsorbing materials that no longer agreed on sequence. A freighter spun sideways in time, not space-time. Its logs rolled backward, then halted mid-command. The AI began reciting its own boot code in 6 languages, then choked into silence. Inside the data tower of Junction Trine, Mirok Val read the feedback burst. His eyes burned, not from strain, but confusion layered so deep it resembled pain. Reverse entropy spikes are controlled, he muttered, fingers trembling over the input rail. It's selective. The lance isn't failing, it's filtering us. Suldan Ref arrived, blood dried into his collar. What is Earth doing? Mirok shook his head. They're not doing. We're undoing. In the sky above Telvec 3, the stars hiccuped. That was the only word the Dominion could settle on later. Hiccup. Not flicker. Not warp. They reordered. And when they did, Dominion vessels tied to static map orientation systems began to rotate without moving, chasing configurations that no longer existed. Back on Kolvek's strain, Drave screamed, not from injury, from understanding. We're being pulled into our own reference timestamps. The lance is revalidating our history, without sinking to current frames. Korth stood silent. Around them, screens bled symbols. One by one, heads-up displays collapsed into overlapping records, some from last week, some projected next month. Anchor us now, Drave barked to the crew. No one responded, because some had already looped, responding to orders that hadn't yet been given. Down in the launch bay of Voron Reach, Chief Tech Iktel Yarv tried to lift a crate. His hands passed through it. When he looked up, his younger self was standing across the room, holding the same crate, confused. I never moved, he whispered. Then neither version of him did again. Korth walked toward the lance control rail, eyes scanning the feedback pulse coming from the inner ring. Something was wrong with its tail. The pulse was converging instead of trailing. The endpoint curved inward, retracing its own route. It's feeding itself, he said aloud. Drave turned sharply. What? The weapon looped. It's pulling its output into its input. A closed causality spiral. That's impossible. So was our fleet vanishing without a fight. The core exploded. Not outward, backward. A flash appeared, and then unappeared, dragging with it a ring of ships that collapsed like falling cards in a breeze of reversed chronology. Each vessel vanished in order of deployment, oldest to newest. A destroyer blinked, then its shadow flickered, then its serial record evaporated from Dominion archives. Mirok's voice, from the last unjammed line, the warhead isn't a weapon, it's a regression engine. Ref's answer, so Earth made us push rewind. Inside Kolvek's strain's last active console, Korth entered one command: seize all actions, hold, observe. It was too late. The lance reached critical reloop and triggered a logic inversion cascade. The last thing the Dominion registered before every ship in the sector dissolved into undeclared sequence collapse was silence. Total, absolute, not the absence of noise, but the absence of order. And Earth, they never blinked, because there was nothing left to respond to. Get me anything, even a ping bounce. Static is better than this. Grevik Tone's fingers danced across the manual relay board in the Dominion's secondary relay vault, breath short from recycled air and the lingering cold of suppressed systems. His voice didn't rise in panic. It was past that. The quiet wasn't absence. It was structured too exact. A stillness that felt placed. 3 channels flickered red, then 2, then none. No scramble, no data clutter. The screen didn't glitch. It obeyed, clean and empty. Across the Dominion's remaining cores, surviving fleets blinked in isolation. Ships floated above gas giants, drifting in systems where orbital pull no longer matched mass readings. Clocks lagged against their own reflections. Time, once a backdrop, now argued with itself. Grevik leaned closer to the central relay display. He triggered a loopback. One last test. A burst of old signal code routed through a collapsed sector. He didn't expect a reply. But the screen didn't stay blank. Not this time. It snapped alive, bright white text etched across black. No flare, no alert chime. Just 7 words burned into every ship, satellite and receiver that hadn't folded inward. You indexed us wrong. Physics is ours now. No carrier signal. No source tag. The code formatting didn't match any known cipher. It arrived everywhere at once. Not simultaneously, but absolutely. On Vorngate's observation lattice, the broadcast hijacked the external camera overlays, displacing stellar telemetry with that line. In the Telvac 3 reclamation outpost, it replaced the auto shutdown prompt, pausing the collapsing core cleanup to deliver the sentence in crisp, impossible clarity. In the deep caverns of the Artok Treaty Council, the main archive doors unsealed themselves, showing nothing but those words scrawled in spiraling threads across internal projection domes. It spread not like a message, but like a verdict. Grevik didn't speak. No one in the relay room did. The sentence repeated once, then didn't again. Not because it had ended, because it had finished being necessary. Around them, screens stayed online, but quiet. Sector maps did not update. Coordinates flickered like dying stars. Someone in the lower bay muttered, "What does that mean?" Tone exhaled, slow and dry. "It means this wasn't warfare." One of the younger operators, a gray-banded relay cadet, looked up, voice quiet and steady. They didn't retaliate. They redefined the terms. On Kolveth Strain's fractured data shell, the 7 words arrived carved into the internal display's fallback code. Not as a hack, as though the system expected them. Korth didn't return to the bridge. He stayed in the zero-sound chamber below the relay node, the last clean room the ship had. He didn't speak, because nothing needed to be said. They had exhausted logic. They had burned treaties, folded time, fired weapons built to fix the unfixable, and Earth had answered with syntax. No war cry, no conditions, just correction. In orbit around the Ekron moon vaults, the Council's tri-lead vessel watched its own scanning systems reroute automatically, bypassing established laws of reflection. A planet below began recalibrating its tectonic registers, not due to tremors, but because its core mass had adjusted itself to a newer framework. Mining rigs exploded, not from fault, but from refusal. Matter refused to obey pre-established density thresholds. Water curved into new depths. Clouds formed below sea level. In a dead relay buoy above Sector Kef, a Dominion tech recovered a static-drenched black box ping. It had been sent 6 hours after the fleet's disappearance in Part 6. The message didn't describe an attack. It read, "Coordinates and constants no longer align. We are mismeasured. Recheck your rulers." That crew was never found. Their log ended before their own trajectory was mathematically possible. Grevik Tone sat alone in the Dominion's last functioning uplink spine. A single display still glowed, showing no signal load, no active packets, just the sentence. He read it again, out loud this time, slowly. "You indexed us wrong. Physics is ours now." The relay room didn't echo. The walls had learned to absorb. Around the galaxy, systems known for centuries began to fall out of sync, not catastrophically, but silently. Asteroid belts rotated inward, moons aligned without rotation, binary stars drifted closer, by choice, not force. In the archives of the Concord's central data ring, the registry for Earth began rewriting itself, not by command, but by recognition. It removed diplomatic status. It deleted threat categorization. It replaced every entry with a single phrase: Terran classification, undefined, constants conditional. On isolated skimmers and shielded observatories, whispers formed into doctrine. Not doctrine of war, doctrine of avoidance. Earth would not be attacked. Not again, because what followed wasn't destruction. It was something no council had prepared for: irrelevance. The inability to define, measure, or react, to be so overtaken by a deeper language that resistance no longer made sense. Grevik turned off the last relay screen. He didn't shut it down. He opted out. The screen darkened, without protest. He sat there a while longer. No orders came, no retaliation issued, only one sentence remained, and it had already said enough. "You do not need to speak. You need only agree." Daskriven's voice held no ornament. No threat, no inflection, merely weight. He stood alone at the center of the Concorde's inner quorum chamber, where no Terran had ever been permitted to set foot, and where none had dared appear until today. Yet none of the 17 species gathered around him demanded an escort, or guards, or translation. He had brought no entourage, no weapons, just a single data shard, cold, transparent, smooth on the table. It carried no power signature, not because it lacked one, because the instruments tasked with detecting it refused to name what they felt. Revan did not sit. He simply stood, unmoved by the oxygen variance of the multi-atmospheric hall, unmoved by the attention of hundreds of bioluminescent eyes, composite sensors, and quantum vibrating observers. He had read the room before he entered, and he had rewritten its conclusion. His hand rested gently atop the shard. The Council had requested a formal explanation for the collapse of Sector Theta 77, for the disappearance of entire fleets, for the corrupted starfield logs, for the broken time relays, and the impossible mathematics now rewriting predictive navigation. Revan gave them none. He did not narrate history. He stated law. These are Earth's conditions, he said. No titles, no preambles, no ceremony. Clause 1. You will not measure Terran actions through previous constants. No one moved. No one even adjusted their posture. A being of the Kural Tel blinked sideways across 3 lenses, but said nothing. Clause 2. Earth will not expand. The assembly barely breathed. Clause 3. Earth will not require territory, tribute, or submission. A faint vibration coursed through the floor. One of the delegates had tried to sync their planet's relay to the room feed. The link failed. Not jammed. Invalidated. Revan's gaze didn't shift. Clause 4. Earth has no interest in ruling what it already governs. Across the back chamber, 2 species known for territorial zeal narrowed their ocular slits. Neither spoke. Their translations remained blank. Even their advisors refrained from pinging secondary data nodes. Clause 5. Earth will not retaliate. A slow hush spread, not from silence, but because language had stopped functioning. Delegates who had prepared 5-layer security speeches were now erasing them, line by line, in their minds. There was no battlefield here, only finality. Clause 6. You are free to reject these terms. Revan paused, not for drama, but because he had allowed the room to imagine the cost. He lifted his hand. The shard began to dim. Clause 7, he said. Now the only sound in a chamber that had once governed galaxies. Preserve the constants, or we rewrite the script. The shard clicked once, not mechanically. It was a closure tone, like a door that had never opened in the first place deciding to shut, retroactively. In front of each delegate, a heads-up display activated, not synced, imposed. The treaty appeared, not as words, but as stable truths. There was no signature required. There was no signature possible. The document knew what was valid. Consent would not be spoken. It would be inferred, by action, or by attempted disobedience. Revan remained still. No applause, no confirmation. The display faded. One by one, each council member bowed, not in honor, but because gravity did not permit them to remain standing. The chamber had shifted its center by degrees. A nudge, a suggestion. Their bodies aligned themselves with Earth's mandate. Revan turned and left without acknowledgement. No Terran warship orbited above. No surveillance beacon tracked him. He did not need protection, because Earth was not in that room. The room was inside Earth's frame of reference. In the days that followed, no statements were issued, no press releases published. The Concorde's external satellites returned to their rotations, but their logs began to auto-correct. Astronomical phenomena, once labeled anomalous, were now marked in compliance. Temporal distortions were rebranded, expected irregularities. Factions that once engaged in Cold War escalations ceased strategic movement, not from peace, but from irrelevance. In one corner of a forgotten system, a mining colony attempted to resume operations. Their drills struck core density earlier than models predicted. The core reconfigured, not violently, but with finality. The site collapsed into symmetry. They sent no second crew. Among archivists and physicists, debate died. Equations that had once demanded 10 pages of calibration, now solved in 6 words. Old constants remained for nostalgia, but no one used them. But the new ones, silent, unattributed, unchallenged, just worked better. And Earth Earth never responded again. It didn't need to. The galaxy moved in its rhythm, and rhythm, once broken, doesn't unremember the beat. In the inner vaults of a now-abandoned Dominion databank, a technician ran a diagnostic one final time. He triggered a query, define Terran threat level. The console paused, then answered in a language the Dominion didn't design. Level reclassified, foundational, status, irreversible. Somewhere in the stillness between two stars, the probe remained, not hidden, not shielded, simply true. The calibration tag still flickered, soft white light, untouched. Underneath it, in the script no one had noticed before, a second line pulsed now. You brought measurements, we brought meaning. And with that, Earth vanished from the debate, because Earth wasn't part of the galaxy's discussion anymore. It had become the syntax it argued in.